Hello and welcome everyone. Tonight's program is the first of our four-part series about Ottawa urban wildlife, series examining topics such as Ottawa bird species, how to make our city birds safe, the biodiversity of our wildlife, Ottawa species at risk, and how to appreciate the various urban wildlife safely for both humans and animals. Tonight's presenter is a bird expert with a long list of education and achievements. Ted Chesky has a career in nature conservation for the first 20 years as an outdoor educator with the Waterloo Region District School Board, and for the last 15 years with Nature Canada, where he has been the naturalist director since 2018. He's a blogger of Birding from the Balcony, licensed master bird banter, active contributor to the 3 Ontario's breeding bird atlases, co-chair of the Indigenous Engagement Committee of Ontario's Breeding Bird Atlas, bird enthusiast, father, grandfather, and Ottawa and Gatineau region residents. I am pleased to introduce Edward for tonight's presentation.
Thank you so much, Tristan. Thank you to Ottawa Public Library, to Amy McPherson from the City of Ottawa, who pointed me out for this. And it's an honor to be doing this presentation. I will start by sharing my screen quickly here. Make sure that works. And you can confirm that with me. And great. I'll start by saying that I'm talking to you today from Gatineau, Quebec. Gatineau is within the unceded, unsurrendered territories of the Algonquin Anishinaabe First Nation. I want to express my gratitude to the Anishinaabe Algonquin people for being the stewards of the land since time memorial, and really responsible for the healthy biodiversity and bird populations that we have still here today. Nature Canada is one of the oldest nature conservation charities in Canada. We were founded in 1939, and we've had our base in Ottawa since 1961. And we work to protect species and spaces in Canada by working with people and advocating on behalf of nature. So we want to make sure that Canada has strong nature policies and laws. With that said, I'm going to be talking about birds. Birds are always birds are obviously important to me, but they've always been a part of Nature Canada's work, just because people are fascinated by birds. So I'm going to give you a bit of a global to local perspective, and I'm going to try to keep track of the time here. I know that we have a limited amount of time. So birds are the feathered members of the feathered nation, you could call them. Globally, there are from 10,000 to 18,000 bird species believed to exist. That number prior to a few years ago was considered to be pretty close to 10,000, but with new genetics, taxonomists are deciding that very similar looking birds that were thought to be the same species, in fact, are different. And so that number, ironically, is increasing. It's increasing at a time that we're losing species extremely fast, which is kind of weird. But we are. And in Canada, there's 690 bird species that have been recorded. A lot of those are accidentals. In fact, there's about only 450 species which occur regularly. It's still a lot. In Ontario, 501 bird species have been recorded. And amazingly, in the Greater Ottawa area, 359, about 72% of all the species recorded in Ontario have been recorded in the Greater Ottawa area. Thanks to I would say a disproportionate population of birders, very good birders who are always out there checking out the habitats and finding the rare species that tend to turn up here. There are 177 to 183 bird species that have bred in the Greater Ottawa area in recent times. And it's estimated that there are 7 million birds that migrate over the airspace in Ottawa in the fall. Many of these birds coming from our boreal forests where they breed and reproduce, and the adults and the offspring that have survived to migrate fly through our airspace to go south. And only probably about 15% or 20% of the birds that are here in the summertime stick around for the fall species, probably even fewer individuals stick around for the winter. Most of them migrate outside our borders to continental United States or further south. I want to make reference to a project called the Ottawa Bird Count that was founded and is managed by Dr. Adam Smith, who is a scientist who works with Environment Climate Change Canada and as a Carleton University. He established this count really to answer the question, how many birds does Ottawa have? And it's a citizen science count, so it's not just Adam that does this, but he's got crews of volunteers out there doing bird surveys in the breeding season, and he uses the results of that in his statistical wizardry to come up with very accurate estimates on how many birds there actually are. You go to the Ottawa Bird Count website, you can see that. And the 77 top species are listed in this great chart here. So the top 15 species I'm going to share with you. And as you might guess from the picture there, the number one is the American robin. And then we go down the list and here's the top 15. So take a look at that, memorize those numbers. I'm going to test you on them later. I'm only joking, won't do that. But the total number here of the 77 species is 1,886,812 birds. It's interesting. That's like a little bit more than twice the number of people who live in Ottawa. So there's like 2 birds for everyone. If it's all the 177 breeding species, the number would probably be pretty close to 2 million. So there's about 2 birds to every person living in Ottawa. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about the top 5. This is the American robin. There's a lot of birds that have American in their name, and because they live in America. And if you live outside the United States, you probably think of America as the continents, North and South America. And the American robin is definitely a bird of the entire North American continent. If you look to the right of the picture of that beautiful robin, there's a range map from All About Birds, Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And that range maps work this way. They use different colors to represent the area that the species occupies during different times or moments of the year. So the reddish area, at least on my computer screen, is the breeding area. And the purpley area down below it is what's called the year-round habitat. And the lighter blue below that is just for winter. So you can see robins occur across North America. Most of Canada, they're here just to breed. But if we could expand that map, we would see that Ottawa is kind of just on that line of year-round and breeding. In fact, there's quite a few robins that are here in the wintertime. They tend to disappear a lot. They tend to be down in some of the valleys and the areas where there's a lot of shelter and some buckthorn and maybe some open water or some berry bushes. But most of them do leave and go south. The robin in the picture here, I took that picture a few days ago. What do robins normally eat? Well, I think most pictures you've seen of robins they have earthworms draped over their mouth. Hey, it's been a drought this year, and there's been pretty earthworms, I think, have been impossible to find. They're deep down in the ground. So the robins have to switch their diet. They're pretty good at that. So they're eating the things that a lot of the other birds are eating. Like I've seen robins foraging in the trees for caterpillars and stuff. So a lot more work that way than easy picking with the worms, which makes it a tougher year probably for them. Next is the song sparrow. I should be saying I've got the French names here. So it's the Bruant chanteur, the Bruant chanteur. Very well named bird. I have a video here. I'm going to play the video. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear it or not. My apologies if you're not. No one has quite figured out the technology to make that really well, but it's got a beautiful song, well deserved. It shows up here in again, we're sort of on the edge, but 99% of song sparrows leave the area, go south. They come back here, and they're one of the first songs that you hear in sort of late March in this area. And they like urban habitat, maybe not quite as much as the robin, which is pretty much everywhere except the densest part of the city. Song sparrows need a little bit more vegetation, a little bit more nature, but they still will occur, you know, if there's some trees around and a bit of forest. Thank you, song sparrow. So wide distribution right across the country for the most part, but doesn't make it quite as far north as the robin did. Number three, species number 3 on the list is the European starling, or the Étourneau sansonnet. It is a species of myna bird, which is an old world family. Myna birds are largely African, Asian species or group family. And in fact, the starling is really a African, pardon me, a Eurasian species. The European starling is, but they were intentionally brought to North America, and I think it was 1890, and a bunch of them were released in Central Park by a very serious fan of Shakespeare who wanted all of the birds that appear in Shakespeare's works to be living in part of the community of the bird community of Central Park. Well, as you can see from that range map to the right, they left Central Park and kind of spread right across North America, from Alaska to Newfoundland, Labrador, down to Mexico. In fact, they're right across the whole continent. That picture doesn't, the map doesn't do it justice. They're throughout South America as well. One thing about them, and myna birds in general, but the starling, they're wonderfully good at imitating other birds. They have trumped many a birder in the winter time, where they will suddenly put out the song, usually like the really, really early spring. They will sing like an eastern meadowlark or a killdeer, birds that would not be here for another month or month and a half. And somehow they pull that out of their repertoire they learned the year before that. And it's a perfect imitation. They're so good at picking up sounds. Then number 4 is the red-winged blackbird, the Carouge à épaulettes. A good example of a bird that's named after one particular sex, which is it the male or the female? It is the male on the left. Red-winged blackbird. That one's showing a little bit more yellow than you often see. But yeah, why don't we name more birds after the females? Well, one of the reasons is the females are kind of streaky and brown, and they're like that because a lot of them are the ones that end up looking after the nests and raising, incubating the eggs and so on. So they don't want to attract as much attention as this flashy guy. He's just interested in attracting the attention of the females. So he wants to be the flashier. You can see their range. It's also quite wide. Again, Ottawa is kind of on the edge of that area. Are they gonna stay? Or are they gonna go? You know, are they gonna go to their wintering grounds or not? Most of them do. Most of them go south for the winter. I spent some time in Nicaragua in the winter time, which is in Central America, and we found a lot of red-winged blackbirds in the fields in December. And number 5, not to be uncounted here or underrated, the black-capped chickadee, Mésange à tête noire. And yeah, it's a charming, adorable bird. Its range goes from Newfoundland to the southern Yukon, a little bit into Alaska, dips a little bit down into the central United States, extends down the Appalachians, but in all the Canadian provinces, and absolutely gorgeous bird. So in 2015, there was a contest to determine what should be the official bird of Ottawa, and the contest, the results of the contest was announced at International Migratory Bird Day, which is now called World Migratory Bird Day. Here you can see in the picture Giacomo Panico from CBC and Mayor Watson, and I think the envelope with the winner is being passed, and through 3,318 people voted on this, and the winner was the black-capped chickadee. Very deserving winner. A very lovely, very charming, very trusting bird. Again, I really don't know another word than adorable. Amazing bird. And a lot of people, probably thousands of people in this area in Ottawa, Gatineau, have experienced black-capped chickadees come and get food. They'll take food like bird seed, sunflower seed or peanut or something like that. They'll take it from your hand, and if you're lucky. But they're very trusting. Places like Mud Lake they're exceptionally tame there. Or some of the trails out in the NCC lands there. So chickadees happen to be one of the birds that is doing quite well, and I want to talk about a little bit about the reasons because these reasons are often characteristics for bird species that are not declining. And don't get me wrong, birds are not doing well right now, and most biodiversity isn't, but there's a few that are doing well. So some of the characteristics seem to be very embodied in this lovely little bird. One is they're adaptable, especially to habitats. Chickadees will occur and live in the deepest forests, but they'll also live in residential areas as long as there's some mature trees that provide nesting habitat. And there's a variety of food sources. They're omnivorous, which means they eat both animal and plant food. Their diet changes throughout the year depending on what's available. They will even eat carrion. For example, in the wild, if a moose or a deer dies, they will go and peck at the skin and the fat and get fat from there. People put suet up at their feeders. The chickadees will be taking advantage of that. But this time of year, they are eating exclusively pretty much insects and arthropods, spiders and things, which is what they feed their young. They're cavity nesters. So they live inside something that offers them an added level of protection from predation from guys like the crows, cats, raccoons, squirrels, things. And those are all animals that can get into a nest and spend time going through the vegetation looking for nests. You nest in a cavity, you have an added advantage of fewer things that can get at you. They are permanent residents. Now, I say that with, if you're new to Canada, you'll think of that as some sort of immigration status, and it's true, it is immigration status. In this case, it simply means they pretty much stay around the same area for most of their lives, although there is migration of chickadees, probably young ones of the year that migrate, although there's not a ton of information known about that. Generally the same chickadees will, once they're adults, they'll stay around the same area for years and years until they perish and are taken over by their younger ones. They have relatively large broods. You know, there are some birds that only have 1 or 2 in a brood. Chickadees have about 5 or 6. So those are relatively large broods. So relatively large broods are advantages when the parents give good parenting. They have a great cooperative social structure. I know this from experience. I studied chickadees for 20 years, doing banding studies, behavioral studies. And one of the interesting facts about them is in the winter, they gather in these larger flocks of that might contain 5 to 10 individuals or 12 even. Within these flocks, they have a range of personality types that make them like a super personality. So, for example, I use the example of risk taking. There's an advantage to being a risk taker when you're trying to find food. There's advantage to being not a risk taker, to being very cautious if you want to avoid being eaten by something that eats you like a sharp-shinned hawk. So one bird cannot really have the best of both, but a flock can. And those flocks tend to contain the spectrum of personalities that allow them better chance of surviving than if they were just individuals, which is amazing. And it's something I found about the flocks, is they seem to have that range. And maybe they benefit from humans. They probably do. This probably explains the fact that they're so social and so trusting of us, is that there's some benefit. Probably that stands to reason that fewer predators will come around when humans are around. So I'm going to share a bunch of videos with you. I had the good fortune of having, for 2 years in a row, and I've moved between those last year and this year, 2 years in a row, I've had chickadees nesting in my nest box. So I just took a few videos, very short 20-second or 15-second videos from here. This is when I lived in Boucherville, Rue Boucherville in Gatineau. And I'm going to take you through a few things. So first video is when we confirmed occupancy. So I happened to get a trail camera, put it up there when we thought they might be going in, and this is a proof. You can see the bird going in. And this is 5:16 in the morning. And yeah, so they're moving into there. A little bit later in the season, this was May 16th. There's a food exchange. So probably the female was brooding at this time. She just starts laying her eggs around then, or a little bit before then, and you saw the male. The male brings her food. Very nice, very good relationship to have. Yeah, I do the cooking in our family as well. Yeah, these are some interesting ones too. I saw some disturbing when I took out the SD cards and downloaded the pictures. I saw these afterwards, and they kind of scary, because I mentioned the cavities are kind of safe places from a lot of potential predators or enemies, but some can still get in, and one is rodents. So this was kind of like a close call. That little mouse could have gotten in there, but it didn't want to go over onto the wood there because it was maybe too slippery as opposed to the surface of the wall. So I felt fortunate about that. And the next is a starling. And the starling seemed very, very interested. Now note that this is the 2nd of June, and the time. So that starling poked its head in, and off it goes. And look at that, right after the starling leaves, in goes the chickadee. And this is amazing because there were still young in there. And you can see that this is right after, right? The adult went in, adult comes out. Now watch this more weakly flying young bird, fledging left. Incredible. Probably the young said, well, it's time to get out of here, as there's a bad dude around here. So migrate, the nest box migrated. about 2,600 meters to new place. And there you can see it's at a different location. It's on a nice, what's called a cabano here in Quebec. And I put my camera on the tree there, right beside it. There's the camera. And once we realized that it was going to be occupied again, not the same birds. These are different birds, but they liked it. And this is my wife checking out occupancy, and we saw eggs, and then on the 20th of May, I saw these little guys that are, we figured, about 2 days old. That's what baby birds look like after a couple days. See, if there's no feathers on them really yet, just barely on some of those. By the way, this part here is their mouths. They have a very big gape, and its gape is thought to be a target for the adults when they bring food. Look at this one here. It's got its mouth open, and you see the big gape here, and closed. Wing feathers coming in nicely. Very irritating sawing noise in the background. I apologize for that. Okay, so 9 to 10 days. So that was 5 to 6 days. 9 to 10 days, the caps are getting blacker, feathers much filling in. You can't see the naked backs anymore. You can see the feather shafts here. So those wing feathers are protected when they start growing by a shaft, it's like skin that protects them. And then they grow out from there, and the shaft just kind of cracks and breaks, and the feathers grow. The guy's eyes are open there. Amazing. Okay, and the last one of the young, I didn't want to disturb them after this. This is 11 to 12 days. Now they're looking like chickadees. Much bigger flight feathers. If I disturbed the nest here and they got out, they probably would try to run away. They wouldn't be able to fly.
Mm-hmm. Parents?
Okay, so that was May the 30th. So much more on my astonishment, I thought they were going to leave a couple days later, but June the 4th, they were still there. Look at the little baby, comes right up now. They're no longer waiting in the nest for the adults to bring them food. They're sticking their heads. They're climbing right up, ready to go. So I'm going to talk a little bit before I go back into what happened to these guys. Chickadees do an incredible job, and I should just say birds in general. They spend their lives during the daylight hours combing through the vegetation on our trees and shrubs and picking off the larvae, that have hatched from moths and butterflies that eat the leaves. These are defoliating insects. And that's all the larvae do. They just are their eating machines. And you can see the image on the right, the holes in the leaves. So birds like chickadees are non-stop gleaners. They looking for these things, and that's what they feed their young. So they are constantly going through the trees and the vegetation. And there have been lots of studies that have sort of documented. I say every 5 to 15 minutes, but sometimes it's every 1 minute even. You'll see one after. It depends how much food is there. Sometimes 20, 25 minutes will pass without them coming to the nest, but more often it's a lot less than that. So, these are examples of some of the critters that you'll see them carrying in their mouths. And I want to point to a study that was done by Takawa and Garten on another species of bird called evening grosbeaks. I haven't seen the equivalent study done on chickadees, but back in 1984, they determined the equivalency in costs of using pesticides to have the same result in controlling the defoliating insects that the birds are doing. They estimated it, a pair of evening grosbeaks in 1984 at $1,820. it's estimated that every bird eats approximately 15,000 caterpillars per year. That's a phenomenal amount. So what does that do? Well, those leaves, what do leaves do? Leaves photosynthesize. So when they photosynthesize, they are removing carbon, which is one of the contributors, main contributors to global warming, because carbon traps heat. So they remove carbon. The leaves do, and they produce oxygen, which all life forms need. And when a leaf is eaten and compromised and desiccated or skeletonized, as some of these insects do, they can't do that. So birds are working to keep the trees healthy. They are our best ally in the fight against climate change. And you've heard that here. I really believe that. This is one of the reasons why we really need to make sure there's healthy bird populations. If we don't do that, we can plant lots and lots of trees, and we're not going to be achieving the goal we need. The other interesting thing is what happens on the other side of things. The waste management system, you can imagine in a little box like this, it can get pretty messy, right? No, wrong. What these birds do, they're born with this wonderful adaptation to kind of be naturally clean. So the poop that comes out, which is a combination of uric acid and food waste, it goes into a little sack. It's called a fecal sac, or as I call it, a caca sac. And the adults come in and they literally lift it away from them, from the cloaca, and fly out and drop it somewhere else. And you know what they do when they do that? They fertilize the trees. So they're doing this many, 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 many times a day. And there's another service right there. So they bring the food in, they feed the birds, and every few times they'll take it away and they'll fertilize the trees. I think you can say, well, this is a video here. I'll click on it. And I think you can see this guy, if you watch him carefully, come out with a fecal sac in his mouth. Oh, there he goes, pretty fast. I don't know if you hear that, but they're very loud at this point. But getting back to these guys, this was the day that they all fledged. So you're going to first see fledging here. Adult enters, and I think the adults kind of encourage them to leave. Adult left. There's a very tentative calling, encouraging. The love you call, they do. Love you. And there's one's gone. There's another ready to go. And we don't quite see it go because it's only 20 seconds. Darn, I wish it was a 30-second video. And you'll see two more go out here. This other video. Now he's a little bit nervous. Initially poke the head out. Come on, there you go. And the other's getting ready to go. And the video stops. Sorry about that. So it's very exciting to see the birds fledge. So I'm going to just shift into something else, but I wanted to show you another one of my favorite species. Not that distant from chickadees, really. It's the blue jay. Blue jays are really the entertainers. They're a member of the corvid family, considered to be probably the smartest group of birds, family of birds out there. The corvids include ravens and crows and jays and nutcrackers. They're very social. They're extremely good at solving problems, and they're a combination of those things rank them very high. This is a scene in my backyard, and again, I if you can hear this, it's great. Just seeing it is pretty cool. This is some sort of a social interaction. Maybe it was establishing social hierarchy. Maybe it was exchanging information, but it was literally in my backyard. I couldn't believe it. You know, the more I think about this, the more I think they must be practicing some sort of a song routine or whatever, or maybe it's a performance. I was intended to be the one recording it. Um, so, Blue Jays, you know, they're doing okay, but their populations have dropped a little bit across North America. And many other species that don't have the adaptability of the jays or the chickadees have suffered a great deal. And now I want to share with you a sobering message, and that is that we in North America we have about 3 billion fewer birds, according to the best science, now than we did in 1970. This was a study that was published in the highly reputable journal Science in 2019. And it's incredible. That's about a 30% decline in populations of birds over 50 years. So just think of what that means in terms of the services, the functions that they're doing in terms of controlling insects when there's 30% fewer. So we know habitat loss, window collisions, cat predation, pesticide use, insect declines are some of the main drivers. We know that cities have become danger zones for birds, and that this is part of the larger biodiversity crisis that we're all facing. Some of the species, this is a very alarming part, but some of the very common species that are familiar to a lot of us have suffered tremendous losses, like the dark-eyed junco, 168 million fewer. White-throated sparrow. If you travel north of here into Les Laurentides or into, say, Algonquin Park, you'll hear the white-throated sparrow has a lovely, very familiar whistle. Sounds like that. 93 million fewer. Starling. You know, some people will be happy to say, oh, there's fewer starlings because they are a nest competition to our native species. But, you know, when even a common species in the city that is adapted to humans is declining, that's a red flag that something is really wrong. Song sparrow, you saw the beautiful song sparrow earlier. I think it was number 2 on the list. There's some 55 million fewer now. And the barn swallow, 26 million fewer barn swallows. A lot of my friends that have barns and are into farming have been wondering where the barn swallows are. All swallows, in fact, all aerial insectivores, birds that eat insects when the fly, are in trouble. They're declining rapidly, and we're pretty sure there's lots of reasons. There's specific species specific reasons, but there's the general reason overall, and that's decline of insect populations. We know that pesticides, that pollution, we know there's lots of reasons behind it, but it's having catastrophic impacts right throughout the food web. So we have a solution for at least one particular landscape, and that's our urban landscape. When I say we, I'm talking about Nature Canada and our partners. And this is a program called Bird Friendly Cities. So I want to end on a very hopeful note here. Bird Friendly Cities has a vision, which is that cities and towns across Canada are safe places for birds, where key threats are effectively mitigated, where nature is restored so that native bird populations can thrive like they're meant to, and where residents are involved in celebrating and helping birds and monitoring their populations. That's our vision. This is our logo. That's an angry bird. It wants to put things right. We like it. And that's our Ville Amie des Oiseaux Bird Friendly City logo. And yes, we want you to be part of it. We want Ottawa to be part of it. What does it mean? Well, a bird-friendly city, and I'm going to put my glasses on for this, is a place where threats to birds are mitigated. So you see a cat there. Cats are the #1 threats that is related to humans. directly related to humans. We know they kill between 100 million and 300 million birds in Canada annually. It's not, we don't want to blame the cats for that, but there are lots of municipalities that have no own bylaws, and there are lots of people that keep their cats inside or pledge to do that with their next cat. So we hope you will. But that's not the only threat. There are lots of others. I mentioned a number of them. Where nature is restored, we can remove all the threats, but if we don't restore nature, birds will not thrive in a sterile environment. So we need to restore nature, restore tree canopy, restore natural habitats, restore our ravines, our corridors that connect them. We need to engage residents in this work. We need to organize events like World Migratory Bird Day that celebrate birds. We need to make sure cities and towns, municipalities have policies that protect birds, like bylaws, like guidelines for bird-friendly building, or bylaws to prevent cats from roaming at large. And a lot of this can be driven by what we call bird teams. And bird teams are groups of citizens, sometimes associated with an organization or organizations, but they drive this forward. So Nature Canada has developed a standard, a certification program to assess how bird-friendly a city is. And there's 3 levels. There's entry level, intermediate, and high level based on a point system, a scoring system. We're aiming to have 30 cities certified as bird-friendly by World Migratory Bird Day 2022. We would love if Ottawa was on that list. You can see this very lovely, friendly cat that the owners are going to take for a walk on its leash. And there are thousands of people who do that now, at least train their cats, and they're very happy. And in the background, there's Margaret Atwood, the most renowned Canadian author of all time, published an adult comic, or a comic for teenagers called Angel Catbird, which is well worth it, that tells the story of how we can do that. We can live together. We need to find a way to do that. So to get there, to get to be bird friendly, we have a system, a set of criteria. As I mentioned before, there's a group that address threat reductions. So you can see in the picture here, this is a picture from the last place I lived in, but you looking through a window of a pileated woodpecker on my suet feeder, but you see these little dots on the window, which are to make that window visible. The dots are on the outside there to make the window visible to birds from the outside, so they don't fly at it. They see, or they don't see just a reflection of the trees or the building and think that they can fly there. They see those dots and they know that that's not a safe place to go. So that's just one example of something you can do. So we think it's a great program, and in fact, already as of the last, as May 7th, we announced ourselves, along with Environment Minister Jonathan Wilkinson, because they are providing a financial support for Nature Canada to get this off the ground. Because Environment Canada has a huge responsibility for the protection of birds through what's called the Migratory Bird Convention Act, arguably Canada's first nature species law, passed in 1917, that really protects all migratory birds from us harming them in their nests. So we were able to announce the first 4 cities, and that was London, Ontario, Calgary, Vancouver, and Toronto as certified. It took a lot of hard work for them to get there. Once a city is certified, it gets a certificate. It tells what level it is, and then they have to provide a report card every year, and they have a high motivation to maintain their status. So what can you do to help? Well, it all starts with an individual. It all starts with all of us. You saw that I do things. I take that very seriously personally. You can do things as well. Start with your own practices at home to mitigate threats from you, from your household, from your neighborhood, including predation by cats, windows, reducing the risk of window collision, stopping the use of pesticides. If you live in Ottawa or Gatineau, plastic use, single-use plastics, birds can get tangled up in that or consume it. disturbing birds during the nesting season, photographers that are way too zealous photographing owls. That's bad. So walk the talk, do things in a way that is going to help our bird populations thrive. Demand strong nature policies at all levels of politics, municipal, provincial, and federal. What does this mean in your city? What does it mean to have strong nature policies? Is there a biodiversity policy? Is there a tree expansion of urban forest canopy policy? Are there policies to manage the forests or the natural areas of the parks in a way that expands the natural habitat and reduces the risks? Support your local nature groups, like there's the Ottawa Field Naturalists, there's Safe Wings, there's the Ottawa Wild Bird Care Center. There's lots of great groups doing great things for birds locally. In Gatineau, there's the Club des Ornithologues de l'Outaouais. Help organize a bird team. It takes work, and many hands make quick work, and it requires diversity. Let's make sure that the face of the bird conservation movement represents a diversity and encapsulates an indigenous perspective, which far too often has been ignored. Gatineau is already well along this path. Gatineau is on the path to certification, and if all goes well, could become a certified bird-friendly city. Let's make sure that Ottawa does as well. Here's some references for you. Nature Canada website. I encourage you to visit our bird-friendly city website. If you want to reach out to me directly, my email is there. If you want to see my blog, it's called birdingfromthebalcony.ca. And it's lots of stories I have to tell about my experiences with birds that you might enjoy. And at that point, I think I've got about 10 minutes, and I want to say thank you and answer questions now.
That was awesome. And so you've actually jumped the gun. There was a couple questions about bird safe cities. So one of them was just saying it was very informative, and to your point, there was 3 billion fewer birds, which is a large number. So this comment was very informative. What can we do to help birds in Ottawa? Similar question was, what can we do to be bird friendly? So I'll loop those two questions together. And you did give us some great options, but what would you say is maybe the first two that's approachable for this, that is easy for us to do?
Yeah, I would say there's the first two are reduce the threats that we cause as individuals. So take charge of what you do personally. I think that's the biggest thing you can do. And that extends to all the different dimensions of our life, be that how we consume, how we manage our pets, and how we render our buildings safe for birds, making windows visible. Birds do not see glass, they see the reflection. So it's easy. Not all windows are dangerous for birds. There's some. So, there's different ways of treatment. You saw I put little marks, these little dots. It's called feather-friendly tape on my windows. The cats it's a controversial thing. There's a lot of people that will argue like till they're blue in the face to say that it's a cat's right to be outside. I don't buy that. Cats are not native species to North America or the Americas. They were brought here. I know they're brought here largely to control pests. I recognize their role in that. But it's got out of hand, and the data is very clear on it. So we need to reduce those cat populations outdoors. A lot of that can be converting outdoor cats into indoor cats, and having stronger bylaws, spay-neuter campaigns, all of those. There's lots of things you can do. You can also, if really you can't train that cat, you can try to dress it up, there's a collar you can put on, or even a bell is better than nothing. But I think we can do a lot better than that.
Absolutely. Yeah. As maybe not my biggest fan of cats, reduce the cat population. No, just kidding. So another question was, so do you have any suggestions for reducing bird collisions with high-rise apartments, especially when renters don't have access to the outside of their windows?
Sure. First off, most collisions with windows take place in individual residences or low rise. It's estimated only 10% of the bird collisions are with high rises, so it's a little bit of a mythology that most of them take that place. Part of it is that when there's collisions in those places, because there's so many windows, they're pretty spectacular, and there can be a lot of casualties. Part of the issue with buildings, it's office buildings that leave their windows on, leave their lights on rather at night. Toronto, City of Toronto has done some great work. They have and other cities in the States that have lights out campaigns. So during the time of migration, that's April, May in the spring, and it's really September, October in the fall where peak migration. Turning the lights out in buildings or at least reducing it is one thing. Another thing is determining which of the windows are causing problems. Vegetation close to windows, trees and shrubs is reflected in the windows is the biggest cause of an issue. So landscaping can be a big factor, and then making those windows visible to birds. I think most of residential places it's where people live. It's probably not much of an issue.
So that actually peeks into the next question. So it was, should we lobby our city councilors and mayor to plant more trees?
Absolutely, yeah. We need to double, triple the size of the urban forest canopy. I don't think we can go too far. It does a lot. We need, as I said before, we need healthy bird populations to keep those trees healthy. So it has to go hand in hand. The species we select have to be species that are useful for birds. We have to reduce our threats to birds so that the populations are healthy, but we definitely need a lot more trees. It will help address climate change, make the city a cooler and a nicer place to live.
Absolutely. Another question, where can I buy a good bird seed and bird nesting boxes for backyards?
Well, I cannot, I don't want to make an advertisement for a particular producer, but there's some great companies out there. Yeah, we've partnered with Wild Birds Unlimited. They do a lot of great work there in Ottawa and Canada. And there's a lot of other stores that sell bird seed. I tend to avoid feeding birds the mixture of lots of different seeds. I would focus on specialty seeds like sunflower, Niger seed, those sorts of things that you won't be attracting too many house sparrows and pigeons and that, and you'll get more like the species like chickadees and cardinals and blue jays and be happier for that reason.
Perfect. So anything that they can find is good. It's just a matter what goes inside.
True. And if I can add to that, put water out for birds in the summertime. And this drought, it's terrible. The drought takes a huge toll. Even I lived in an apartment with a balcony on the top of a house for 15 years. I had on my balcony, I attached a couple little olive containers to the siding, put a perch underneath it. I had birds coming there constantly throughout the day. Change the water, keep it clean. Water is really, really important, and especially these days of the drought.
Good tip, absolutely. And another question about bird feeder. Should I use my bird feeder in the summer or only in the winter? Is there a preference?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a great question because there is controversy. Feeding in the spring, from mid-spring to summer to fall, I personally more or less stopped doing it. The only reason I put a few peanuts out there for the blue jays, and I make sure the jays get them, and I have a hummingbird feeder. But the regular feed, the Niger and the sunflower, I start feeding sort of mid-late October. And part of the reason is that birds, anyways, most of the birds shift over to insects, the ones that are around here in the summer. The other thing, or in the winter, the other thing is that the bird seed can, when it's exposed to heat and moisture that happens when it's not below freezing, it can develop molds and toxins. It spreads disease. like salmonella, like botulism. These are all, and there's other parasites that can be spread. So it can become a terrible source of disease for birds if it's not really, really regularly maintained and kept clean. So I personally think it's better not to be feeding, putting all the food out. But if you do, please make sure it's clean. And if you hear of any signs of disease around, stop feeding.
Good too. So this is a little bit of a long one. If a bird has just started building a nest in an undesirable location on a property, if the nest is removed, will the bird go build a nest elsewhere? If it's not harmful to the bird, if no eggs have been laid yet, but the nest is removed.
Yeah, that's a really tricky question to answer because there's, I mentioned before, the Canada has a law called the Migratory Bird Convention Act. And the letter of the law is that it is illegal to disturb the nest of the active nest of a bird or its eggs during the breeding season. You're not allowed to do that. In some species, like great blue herons, you're not allowed to do that anytime. So in theory, you're not allowed to do that. I mean, the best solution is if you can put up with it, it's temporary, it might be 25, 30 days. If you can use another entrance and just kind of put up with it. And once they're done, take the nest down. And that year, maybe try to make it a little bit more difficult for the bird to do stuff there by hanging some stuff to where they put it. That would be my advice. And often those first nests that are in those bad places, they fail, but they shouldn't be failing because of us. They're fairly easy for bird things like crows to find, and then the adults find out after that they weren't good places.
All
I hope
right.
I've answered that question in the most diplomatic way.
I think you did. Another one, is it okay to feed the birds on the NCC trails? I see people feeding from their hands, but the signs say don't feed the wildlife. So does that include birds?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't work for the NCC, so I would suggest you want to clarify it with them. I think what it's referring to, for the most part, are geese, ducks, and gulls, which are considered by some people to be nuisance species. And I don't think it applies to chickadees, but again, if you're concerned about this, I think chickadee feeding, like people feeding chickadees, is such an attraction to these places. I would be surprised if the NCC frowned on that, but I could be wrong. It's always good to check with them.
But for your as an expertise in this, would you say it's a matter of what you feed them, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would make sure that if for the chickadees and the downy woodpeckers that come when the nuthatches and so on, untreated sunflower seeds is really the best.
So that ties into a question I was just asked. I see Canada geese being fed bread by well-meaning people at our parks. Does this harm them?
Probably not. Probably it doesn't harm them because they eat a lot of stuff they probably shouldn't be eating as well. I have read that the bread can expand into their gullet and stuff like that. I don't know how true that is. What it does is it does create this a behavior that can lead to aggressive interactions. And a Canada goose is a big bird, and it can harm someone. They can, and then that will result in harm to the goose. Eventually, it'll have to be removed and stuff. So it's really not a good practice to do that. But there are certain people that just do that. They grew up doing that. Their parents did it. Their grandparents do it, and I don't think it's a good thing to promote. But again, I'm not. If I walk past someone doing that, I probably would not be the one stopping them. I think signage is good, and education is the way to get at it.
Okay. So which species of trees are good for birds, or is there one in particular that we should be looking out for to plant?
Yeah, I would say a diversity of trees, ideally native species. The berry producing trees are wonderful. it really depends. There's a honey locust tree that my neighbor has that grows in over my yard, and the birds are constantly going into it. It's not a native species to this area. It's from the further south, but it's got a big canopy full of bugs, and that's what they're after. The ones that have seeds, or produce seeds or cones or berries that are native to this area, a lot of our species are adapted to them. So the white pines, the white spruces, serviceberry is a very good for smaller tree. Elderberry is a very good smaller tree. Manitoba maple is kind of a weedy tree, but there's a lot of birds that love to eat the seeds from that. There are very good resources out there on bird friendly vegetation, and with the Google, as my father would have called it, it's not difficult to get that information and get some good advice. Nature Canada has some good information on our own website about that too.
I'm sure the library maybe has, those books. I think
I
those
would.
things with paper.
People still look at those.
Yeah. So that could be it. But that's good.
I've got my own library right there.
Awesome. And so we're going to go with one last question because we're going over. Have you had any other species of birds nests in your box?
Another great question. Those boxes I have not, no, but I have had in the past house wren, which will nest in a chickadee box. One of the important things with nesting boxes is the amount of space in the box and the size of that entrance hole. That size of the entrance hole is very important for excluding species like the starling in my video. Starling couldn't get in there because the hole is too small. It's 1 1/4 inches. I don't know what that is in metric. 1 1/4 inches diameter. Starling cannot get in there. Chickadee can. House wren can. So that is very important. If you get a generic box with a larger hole, it's going to be occupied by anybody. Could be starlings, could be squirrels, could be mice, and you won't be able to exclude those things. So that's probably the most important part of it. There's another bird called the great crested flycatcher, which is a really interesting bird that migrates to Central America. It will nest in nesting boxes as well. And if you're lucky, you might have one of those on your property if you have the right nesting box with the right sized hole in the right place.
Perfect. Well, that was great. Thank you so much, Ted. And thank you everyone for coming to tonight's program. For more wildlife programs, tune in next week on June 21st for our next program in the series, Ottawa Urban Wildlife, Biodiversity of Animals in Ottawa. And for more information, check out the Ottawa Public Library website, Ottawa Public Library at biblioottawalibrary.ca. Thank you, Ted, and thank you everyone for attending. Have a great night. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.